Neill, how are you doing there?
Great, thank you.
Terrific. Welcome. There's a packed room, I'd say about, 40 people in the room? 30 people in the room? So folks from all around London, thank you so much for joining us from Seattle and taking time out of your day. I just wondered if you would be able to start off by just letting us know a little bit about yourselves and about Filmic Pro as a company.
Sure. Well, first of all, hello everyone. Thanks for coming out. We're excited to spend some time with you. And Filmic Incorporated is actually a relatively new C Corp that grew out of Cinegenics LLC, which was the original creator of the Filmic Pro app back in 2011. Filmic Pro basically grew out of a concept for a B-roll camera, which the idea was once the iPhone 4 came out, it shot 720p HD, had certainly significant issues with, say, like the rolling shutter speed. But if you work within the limitations of the device, you could get really quality 720p HD footage. So the initial concept was that a filmmaker could be coming home from set, see the perfect either establishing or insert shot, cutaway, pull over to the side of the road, grab the shot, FTP the file up to the editor, and it could get dropped into the timeline. And so very quickly thereafter, the thought was if it's going to be good enough for those professional, semi-professional applications, then it's going to have much broader use to people all over the world and potentially might eviscerate the $500 to $1,000 handycam market. And I think it's actually taken off in all sorts of interesting ways, one of which the mobile journalism community has been one of the earliest and most passionate adopters of what mobile video can do in professional applications.
So let's start with the most obvious question, which is that most smartphones can shoot video straight out of the box on the native camera app. So what does Filmic Pro add to that picture? What can you do with that app that you can't do with the straight native camera app?
Oh, sure. Well, probably all of you guys know that you can shoot 25 frames per second or 24 frames per second. I mean, I think that was actually the big one for us being independent filmmakers when we started the pursuit of the project. We wanted a cinematic look, and 24 frames per second is basically establishing everybody's mind of what cinematic motion is compared to 30 frames a second for video. 25 for PAL is much closer to 24, of course, in the European markets. But basically, we wanted to mimic the quality and control and manual features that you would see in roughly a $10,000 to $20,000 camera to the best that we could. And that's been the guiding principle for Filmic Pro from the outset. Give the user as much expressive control over what they're doing as possible.
I think perhaps assume that not everyone in the room would know. I mean, there'll be people here to whom mobile journalism and Mojo content making is quite new. So about the app itself, you can control things like focus and aperture and white balance. What else can you do with it that enables you to produce something like Tangerine and the other Ligurian, for example, the pieces that we saw before we started the Q&A?
Sure. So actually, an important clarification, you can control exposure, but you can't control aperture because there's a fixed aperture on the smartphone. So you're actually working within a significant limitation of the hardware, like 1/3 of the exposure triangle doesn't exist. So by giving the user control over either shutter speed or ISO, we'll let them dial in as specific a look as they want. To speak to what made Tangerine such a success, one of the things that our app does is it enables a higher bitrate recording. We actually have 2 levels that exceed the default bitrate of the Apple native camera. And so in Sean's case, when they shot Tangerine, they used the 50 megabit per second extreme encoding rate. And what that did is give the editor much more data-rich files for color grading the image, which is depending on which version of the story you believe, is kind of where Tangerine got its name, from the sort of warm, saturated, late sunset hues that infused the final picture. But if you didn't have as large a file, then you would certainly be degrading the image and it wouldn't hold up after color grading, much less projected up on a 40-foot screen in theaters. So focus, exposure, shutter speed, control, being able to choose resolutions, manual controls of focus and exposure, and being able to pull focus, or being able to assert as much control over audio as possible, and then also being able to hand off the audio controls to an external microphone that has line level inputs. That's exceedingly valuable. Like in the use case for the native camera app, it wants to make a satisfying and convenient experience for just about anybody who wants to shoot it. So in the case of audio, it's going to compress any incoming signal and like roll off the highs and bump up the lows, which is broadly useful. But if you're actually shooting narrative feature film, you might want something to be whisper quiet because the characters are supposed to be whispering to each other, and so you wouldn't want the gain imparted on your signal. So basically, whatever expressive goal the content creator is bringing to their project, we want to enable them to do that.
How are journalists using Filmic Pro? You mentioned earlier that it's been picked up by the Mojo community, the journalism community, fairly early on. What sorts of work have you seen that's impressed you or made you take the app in perhaps directions that you didn't think of when you first put it together?
Oh, so this is interesting. Kevin and I were having a kind of spirited conversation about this earlier this morning on sort of like what even the nature of Mojo is. So I'll get to that in a second and let Kevin weigh in on it. But so Glenn Mulcahy was probably the earliest pioneer that I know of in smartphone video for mobile journalism, and before I ever got to know Glenn, he was teaching Filmic Pro at something called CERTOM, which I guess was a consortium of about 182 European broadcast networks. So I think very specifically the fact that he could get people to shoot at 25 frames per second and get full control over focus and exposure were the main selling points. Further selling points, of course, are the price point and the convenience, and then the fact that actually smartphones can get lots of places that traditional ENG cameras will be much more intrusive. So on the price point of a traditional ENG camera rig was roughly about $45,000, and you can completely outfit somebody with a mobile kit for about $1,000. That's an enormous price savings, which should let a news organization give camera gear to many more of their staff other than just the trained professional camera operators. So that potentially is an issue in and of itself. But as you guys will see in the second half of the videos, there's a great piece. It's about a 4-minute film shot inside North Korea. It has absolutely no dialogue and just a sort of like hypnotic audio track. But I would argue that it gave a more truthful and honest representation of what North Korean citizens are like and the shared humanity that we might have with them than any, say, bloviating news report about how horrible the North Korean political establishment is, which, that might be true in and of itself, but it isn't in a window inside the country and inside the culture. And so this small little short 4-minute mobile video piece is incredibly illuminating. So that's the conversation that Kevin and I were having. Like, where does documentary leave off and mobile journalism begin? And I'm not sure we came to any specific decision about that.
We had a spirited debate about journalism between two non-journalists. So, but really, the fact is we were really quite blown away by the content that Filmic users around the world had provided into the Filmic short film contest last year. And, part of the debate was, how do we even draw up the categories for the short film contest going forward? Because, we would have entries that would go in with mobile journalism. We'd have entries that would go in with documentary type work. And, at its core, both are trying to tell a factual, unbiased representation of information to someone who may not know that information. I mean, that's kind of where we were putting a box around it. So it's going to be interesting to see what our contest looks like this year. But it's not really that much of a surprise then that Filmic Pro, which is historically and at its origins intended for the filmmaker, is being picked up by users for telling virtually any story. I mean, at its core, it's still just a lens. We don't have big budget effects in there. You don't see explosions and, all sorts of things that might, twist the story around. It can be as factual and realistic and as clear and concise a story as possible.
And one last little coda on that. I think you played both Philip Bromwell's piece about King of Coffee at the outset, and then followed by the Ligaron short documentary from the Philippine hinterlands. And I would actually where's the line between those pieces? Is Philip's decidedly mobile journalism, and is the other piece decidedly documentary, or are they both relatively evocative little slices of life? So, I mean, you guys can probably answer that much better than we can. As Kevin said, a debate between non-journalists, but interesting conversation to have.
We can certainly pick that up, I think, later on this evening when we start the social part of this event. And we'll open this up to questions from the floor shortly. But it isn't just journalism and content storytelling either. I think Bentley surprised everybody with a car ad in 2014, which will play after the Q&A so that you can see that. And that was very slick, and that was marketing. So what sorts of innovative work are you seeing from that side of film production around advertising and marketing?
Right, so that's growing exponentially as well. And I think at first, basically everybody looked at mobile video as sort of a novelty act and thought it was cute, and probably actually even snickered a bit and thought it couldn't possibly be used for professional applications. So certainly Bentley was instrumental in getting people to take a more serious look at it. And in their case, they had a very direct tie into the iOS ecosystem. The particular Bentley model, I'm not sure which it was, maybe the Mulsanne or something, came with iPad workstations in the back of both of the front seats, so whoever was being chauffeured around could presumably get their work done. So they wanted to shoot with iPhones because they had iPads in the car. So that was the direct tie-in there. But subsequently, New Balance has done a skateboard video that played over the summer that was exceedingly well done. And then at the conclusion, I think the last two videos on your program, slated for after we're done chatting, Snowbird and This Moment, are, in my opinion, two of the best things ever done on mobile video, but they're also done for brands. One was done for a surfboard company, and one was done for a fashion company. And so they very specifically found filmmakers that they liked, that whose aesthetic they appreciated, and then commission them to do a project. And I think that you're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, and actually, just going back to the previous comment where we were talking about blurring the lines of mobile journalism and documentary, some of these clips you'll see, I mean, Snowbird and This Moment, both of them definitely blur the lines on what is advertising and what is just creative film. Snowbird, I think I've probably seen it 14 times by now, and every time I watch it, I'm just completely entranced at the fact that this is actually a 12-minute advertisement of a spring and summer collection for fashion, nothing that I'm actually terribly interested in. So, able to accomplish the storytelling goal while also achieving a goal for, paid means is a really fascinating side effect of this app.
Now, it obviously takes more than a smartphone, though, and the app to produce good content. We do have a room full of folks here. Some have brought Mojo kit with them, some are completely new, I think it would be fair to say, to the genre. So what's some of the kind of kit that people need to start thinking about to get the best out of this app? And just bear in mind, not everyone here is a Hollywood filmmaker or has access to Bentley's marketing budget either. So just some tips would be great.
Why don't you start?
Sure. Okay. Well, so actually the iPhones have done a huge benefit for everybody with the advent of cinematic image stabilization, which covers the chief limitation of the device historically. So while stabilization and stabilizers are a definitely good idea, they're not as 120% essential as they were before. If you use cinematic image stabilization on the 6 series and higher, you stand a good chance of getting a compelling image. But in the motorized gimbal space, I think, is the most interesting development on the stabilization side, and then I'll let Kevin talk about everything.
I'll just stop you there just for 1 second. Explain what a gimbal is.
Okay, well, so they used to be primarily like free-floating stabilizers that basically worked on a friction balance point. Probably somebody in the audience can give a better description of it than I can. Steadicam Smoothie was sort of the first mover in the space. They had something for about $200 that I, for the life of me, could never get a workable image out of. To Sean and Radian Chung, the DP of Tangerine's credit, they actually shot the entire film with the Steadicam Smoothie, and they trained for about a month each to be able to get a compelling image. But the problem with the free-floating gimbal is any part of your body movement has a chance to basically create a really seasick image as it imparts on the gimbal. So the motorized gimbal takes that human error completely out of the equation, and it basically keeps it rock steady so you can move your wrist any which way and it'll keep an even, smooth horizon. You have pan tilt features on it. So you stand a good chance of mimicking what would have been a $20,000 to $50,000 Steadicam shot for $350. Now, it's much harder to do follow focus and that sort of thing while using one of these rigs. So there are still some limitations, but I think that that's one of the most exciting developments on the gear side. Optics are also crucial. Schneider's iPro lens kit has long been the leader in the space. Olive Clip has a very convenient and useful wide-angle telephoto snap-on solution. Moment Lens is another mover in the space, and then most excitedly, Zeiss Lens, famous from their like $10,000 Super Speed series for cinema lenses, has just announced that they're coming out with some iPhone optics as well. So that covers another one of the inherent limitations of the device, which is a fixed lens. Though I will say that Apple does have a patent for a optical zoom that runs up the side of the iPhone. It hasn't been implemented yet, but I would think that we will see that in the next 2 to 3 years. And then the audio companies have made some major changes in recognizing the seriousness of the space over the last few years.
Yeah, I think audio is, especially for Mojo, is obviously absolutely critical. Filmmakers generally, if they have the budget for it, Sean for Tangerine elected to go with separate audio. So he was actually recording the image with the app on the little plastic handheld gimbal, but he actually had professional separate audio that they synced up in post. That's always going to be your best bet. But if you're going to be going out on site to shoot some sort of a Mojo story, the best audio you can get within your kit is key. I'm sure anybody that has a Mojo kit has a preferred microphone. And in the last year or so, we have seen the maturity of microphones for smartphone use go through the roof. A couple of years ago, most of the microphones we were testing with really were dumbed down microphones that they decided to throw at the mobile market, most of which would require some kind of an adapter, whether it's a TRRS adapter or if it's basically an XLR style with the 3 prongs, just like you would be singing karaoke with. They weren't taking, most of the microphone manufacturers weren't taking the mobile market seriously 2, 3, 4 years ago. Now we're just seeing it through the roof. I'm sure you're familiar with brands like iRig and Rode. I've got the Video Mic Me here. I mean, this is a fantastic little mic. We've been testing with this thing. It's really, really small, as you can see. It's a directional mic, works great. We just received this one from Shure. This one's really quite interesting. It's the MV88. This is a stereo mic. I'll put it up here. This is a stereo microphone that uses a lightning connector. It has its own firmware on here that tells the iPhone exactly what this mic is and what it can do. You can set up digital signal processing, all sorts of doodads on this thing. Sennheiser has put out a bunch of smartphone mics. Quite an interesting new spectrum on the microphone and audio side. Otherwise, I'm sure most Mojos in the audience aren't, spending the additional for the motorized gimbals, etc. So you're going to have some version of just a handheld stick. This is just adapted from actually an old Fostex mobile microphone. The microphone is pretty good, but I really like this grip. This is my favorite handheld grip, and it has a cold shoe mount up on top. It has a mount on the bottom that I can use for a tripod. And I'm sure if you poll the room, you're going to get 15 or 20 different answers for what is the best handheld stick. Some people like to make their own and everything in between.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I can see over in the front row here, we have John McHugh, who's from Verify Media, who has, there's certainly done a very interesting hack on a handheld piece. And David,
yep.
Who has one of the smaller microphones that you just saw. So we'll certainly focus a meetup in the next few months on, I think, newbie stuff and an opportunity to bring along kit and have a look at what all of this stuff looks like. In my view, that's actually quite useful. It's one of the great things I think about bringing together a mobile content storytelling community, because often you have to buy this stuff online and you don't get to practice with it. So it's a nice chance to do that. Now, you mentioned iOS in the context of Bentley. I'll just add that as a caveat, none of the brands mentioned today are endorsed by myself or Trinity Mirror, which is very kindly hosting this event. But the big news this year was Filmic Pro became available on Android. How's that going? Because that's a big step for you, and obviously for anyone who can't afford an iPhone, which is most people on Earth.
Yeah, so I'm going to punt back to Kevin because he's been heading up our Android development and can tell you all about it.
Sure. So we've been working on our Android version of Filmic Pro for quite some time now. Actually, essentially, really over a year. And basically, that culminated in what we launched at the end of December, which is the initial offering for Filmic Pro on Android devices. There's great opportunity, and there's also great frustration in the Android market, or at least there can be. Everybody is aware of the notion of fragmentation on Android. If you're not familiar with it, what typically we're talking about is the fragmented approach to device delivery, because there's N number of hardware manufacturers that have N number of models, and then, of course, there's the notion of the operating system itself. Android is really scattered or fragmented across probably 4 or 5 different versions of Android right now, and there's no real force for anyone to have to upgrade. So it makes it challenging for third-party developers, especially if you're going to be using every aspect of the OS and the device, and that's exactly what Filmic Pro, of course, has to do. So we had to take a fairly focused, laser-focused, I should say, view of how we were going to release this, because our Filmic Pro users on the iOS side have come to expect a certain level of feature support, certain level of quality that we wanted to make sure we could impart on our Android offering. The easier approach would be to basically come up with a much wider offering of features that could actually happen for a much wider offering of devices across many operating systems. We elected to actually launch our first version to support what's known as the Camera 2 API. If you're not familiar with Android, there's basically 2 main APIs, and an API is just a programming interface which allows developers like us to access the bits and pieces within a device, specifically camera, audio, things like that, for use in making our app. So there's the Camera One API, which was originally supported on the earlier devices, actually through KitKat, right up to, it actually was supported on a lot of devices that were initially launched with Lollipop, which is version 5. But then at version 5 Lollipop, we started to see the new API take hold, which is Camera 2. Camera 2 is, to put it shortly, is the API that allows us to have manual controls that you take for granted on the iOS side. That's manual focus, manual exposure, and a bunch of other features that are within it. So we wanted to make sure our initial launch was going to be supporting, at the very least, all of those features on those subset of devices. The interesting byproduct was it actually pushed us down the path of a kind of a limited targeted release because there's only so many devices that can support Camera 2. So there's roughly 100 devices right now on the market that support the Camera 2 API, and that's what Filmic Pro is offered for. Now, going forward, we are expanding our support. I think you probably are aware that we have an ongoing beta, actually. We just rolled out a request to bring on a whole new additional batch of testers, and this is actually for our expanded support. We're looking at offering a version of a Filmic video app for Android that would apply to those devices that cannot support Camera 2, or if you're a Camera 2 user that doesn't need all the fancy bells and whistles of manual focus, manual exposure, and all the rest of that stuff. It'll still give you, great reticle response and headphone monitoring and all of the usual functionality you would expect from a Filmic product, but it'll be geared towards that wider array of devices.
And I just have to get this off my chest, but Android makes it exceedingly difficult and frustrating for developers in comparison to Apple, in that Apple's ethos is to develop new features, see them to third-party developers, let third-party developers innovate with the new features after WWC each year, and then a year later, Apple usually takes the best implementations of the new feature sets that have been proven in the marketplace and then bring them into their core offerings. Android manufacturers, and without throwing anybody under the bus, seem to take the exact opposite approach, where they cherry pick the best features for themselves and lock third-party developers out from either offering the higher frame rates or offering 4K support, though they use 4K as a marketing vehicle for their phones. So that's exasperating, to put it mildly.
I took the diplomatic approach, but...
Yeah, I took the impassioned approach.
No, that's okay. There's a few people in the room that appreciate this rolling your eyes. I think if folks are interested in joining that beta project, and you're on Android, contact Neill and Kevin at via Twitter. They're at Filmic Pro. So that's literally just, I think, in the last couple of weeks that you've expanded that program. So if you're interested in being in on the ground floor and feeding back, I think what's been really great about apps like Filmic and the people that run these companies is that they're extremely responsive for the most part to the requests from the Mojo community, which has been great. So just really briefly, and then we'll throw it open to the floor. Guys, new features planned for future updates of the app. This would be a lovely moment to share that.
So this is our actual Filmic remote app, and we are connected with a iPhone 6S Plus at the corner of the table looking back at us. So
Sorry, just sitting here doing the screen math, yes?
And rumors of when the Filmic remote was going to be back on the market, that should be available within the next 2 to 3 weeks. And vastly improved than the last time that we had it. So we're exceedingly excited about that. And another thing that's grown out of the remote development is our H.264 streaming technology. And so we don't know exactly what our live streaming play is going to be, but it's under consideration. So I don't know if Meerkat and Periscope quite have to watch out. But we're looking at doing something interesting in the space. And then the last ambition that we're going after is a start-to-finish mobile workflow with pre-visualization products up through post-image processing, color grading, manipulation, shadow highlight resuscitation, that sort of thing. So, exciting times.
I'm going to just blab a little bit about the next update because everybody's on non-disclosure here, right? And there's no Periscope or anything live, right? No. We do have a very...
It's just over there.
I know.
Please go.
We have enough people in the beta in the room that probably could expand on the new features that are coming in our version 5.2. Not just what's coming with that remote that he just showed you, but we're actually expanding support for frame rates. We're going to be offering time-lapse functionality, true time-lapse within the app. We're also going to be, and this is the contentious point, offering vertical video support for basically the first time on our new architecture. And
you know Mark Blacksettle is at home watching this on Periscope. So.
Well, he's sick, and I think he's sick because of the vertical video piece. But yes, we are offering vertical video with all of the same functional support that you have throughout the rest of the app. We're also offering, like I said, time-lapse. And for those of you that have been using does anybody in the audience have the Apple Watch used with the app? Anybody been using it?
Anyone got an Apple Watch? No? Oh, there's one person. One person has an Apple Watch.
All right. Well, there might be a new reason because in our next version we're going to have, I don't know if you can see it, but live streaming video preview. I'm not showing that real well, but in this next version of the Apple Watch support for Filmic, it's going to have an actual video frame so that you can frame up your shots even better and make sure you're actually in it when you start your recording.
And the latency on the Apple Watch is pretty much as good as it is on the Filmic remote device, so it actually should prove quite useful and informative. And also, this has been something that I've been doggedly after, but we made some significant improvements to our focus algorithm, and so it's going to be faster, smoother, and more accurate than it's been on the Swift 2 code base. And so exceedingly happy about that, and I think our users will as well.
Yeah, and actually, just going back to Android real quick, because, the Android users are a passionate bunch, and I just want to make sure that it's also known that basically, we consider the Android rollout to be the baseline of where Filmic Pro, essentially version 5 on the iOS side, trying to get that baseline across to as many users on the Android platform as possible. And then the plan from there is going to be to basically, kind of cross-pollinate from one another the best attributes of each over to each platform. For example, Android does have things we cannot support right now on the iOS side. For example, the big one is SD card saving. We can actually, on most Android devices, save directly to an SD card while you're recording, which if we don't have that luxury on the iOS side, you would actually have to record it first and then offload it to an external platform. So keep in mind that there's going to be an awful lot of Android rollouts, a bunch of new features. We're actually going to we just recently finalized support for the anamorphic Moondog Labs for Android. And the fact is we can iterate much faster on the Android side actually than we can on the iOS side. So there's always going to be a little bit of pros and cons on both sides.
Brilliant. I think we'll open it up now to questions from the floor. I've been told by the organisers that I need to speak louder. So we did have a conversation about microphone. We'll get a bigger microphone for next time. But I'd love to take some questions and please speak very loudly. Has anyone got any thoughts that they'd like to put to Kevin and Neill? There's a question from the back.
I was thinking about some of the professional features you're adding. Is it possible to add things like zebra or focus peaking and stuff like that?
Zebra and focus peaking?
Zebra and focus peaking are both enhancements that we have on our roadmap in varying degrees of design or development.
They'll definitely be out. It's just a question of when, and I think they'll definitively be out on the iOS 9 platform and won't have to wait till iOS 10.
That's great news.
That's great news.
Oh, yeah, we're excited to bring those. We actually had to do some significant work with our metering and sampling architecture under the hood to enable both of those features. So it's a considerable amount of work, but it will lay a new foundation that will be a significant benefit going forward.
Other questions? No other questions? Okay. I think you probably covered everything. There's possibly some technological things that have been discussed in the Q&A that feel free later on, if some of this content was new to you, to have a chat to myself or Leon or John over here, hand up, or Catalina. I'm sure there are other folks in the room that are adept mobile producers, so if you want to identify yourself shortly, then please do so. But for now, guys, I very much appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us live from Seattle and taking the time to speak to really the first big London Mojo meeting. I really appreciate it.
Hey, Corinne, any chance you can turn your laptop around just so we can see the audience and give them a brief wave?
I think we can. Here we go. Here we go, everyone.
Thanks, you guys. Really appreciate it.
That's great. All right, well, thanks, guys. And I'm going to swipe you away now so that we can have a look at some of those pieces that you were talking to in the Q&A. So thanks so much and really appreciate it.
Right, sounds great. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye now.